The wind over the New Mexico plains carried dust, sorrow, and the smell of drought. It howled against the wooden walls of Hayes Ranch, a stretch of land so wide and lifeless it seemed to echo its owner's unhappiness. Inside that grand but hollow house lived Eleanor Hayes, a woman of delicate beauty and quiet despair. Her husband, Thomas Hayes, was a wealthy rancher, proud, respected, but hard as the land he ruled. They had been married for 5 years, yet the silence between them had grown heavier than the long summer heat. Each year began with hope, a prayer whispered in the dark, a calendar marked in secret, a heartbeat she swore she could almost feel within her. And each year ended in disappointment, another empty cradle in the corner of the room. In those days, a woman's worth was measured in children, and Eleanor bore none. The whispers in town reached her even in her solitude. "Poor Mrs. Hayes," they'd murmur in the church pews. "So lovely, yet barren." She pretended not to hear, though every word struck her like a lash. Thomas, once tender and charming, had changed after the 3rd miscarriage. His gaze grew distant, his affection turned to resentment. He filled his days with business, cattle drives, land disputes, and whiskey. When he did speak, it was often to remind her of what she couldn't give him. "You had one duty, Eleanor," he said one bitter evening, his voice thick with drink. One. After that night, she stopped eating at the same table, stopped waiting for him to return home. She filled her hours with reading, tending the garden, and caring for the ranch hands' children, the little ones who would run up to her skirts with dusty hands and smiling faces. Their laughter filled a void she could not name, yet when dusk fell and the candles burned low, loneliness crept in like the cold. She would sit by the window, staring at the endless desert beyond the fence, the red horizon stretching toward mountains she'd never seen. Sometimes she wondered what existed beyond that line, where the land became wild and free. That longing, the one she never spoke of, grew stronger with each passing year. Eleanor had always been curious about the Apache tribes who roamed those distant hills. To her husband, they were enemies, raiders, thieves, savages, as he called them. But to her, they were something else, untamed, mysterious, alive in ways the settlers were not. She'd heard stories of their songs at night, of warriors who spoke to the wind and loved with a fierceness that frightened and fascinated her. One evening, as the sky turned gold, she found an old medicine pouch hanging by the corral, likely dropped by a trader. Inside were herbs and feathers tied with sinew. She held it to her chest and felt an inexplicable ache. Something inside her stirred, a strange wordless desire to belong to something greater than sorrow. Her husband noticed her restlessness. "You've been wandering too far from the house lately," he warned. "Don't go beyond the ridge. There are Apaches out there." But Eleanor only nodded, saying nothing. That night, unable to sleep, she stepped outside barefoot, the ground cool beneath her toes. The moon hung low, painting silver over the sand. She whispered to it like an old friend, the same wish she had whispered so many times before. Just one child. Her voice trembled in the stillness. She didn't ask for wealth or love anymore. Just the chance to hold life, and even once, the wind answered with a sigh, and somewhere far off a coyote cried. Eleanor felt a shiver run through her, a sense that something had shifted in the night. She didn't know that destiny had already begun to move, that in the days to come, the emptiness of her world would collide with a force far greater than her grief, and that force had a name she did not yet know. Taza, the Apache warrior who would change everything she believed about love, loss, and what it meant to truly give all. The morning came clear and bright with a cruel kind of beauty. The sky was endless, the land still, and yet something in the air felt watchful. Eleanor Hayes packed a small parcel into her wagon, determined to deliver medicine to the Simpson homestead, a family 20 miles away whose youngest boy had taken ill. Thomas had ridden north on business, and no one was there to stop her. She tied her bonnet beneath her chin, loaded 2 canteens, and clucked to the horses. The wagon rattled across the dry creek beds, the sun already biting at her skin. She told herself it would only be a few hours there and back. By midday, heat shimmered across the plains like liquid glass. The trail wound between low, jagged hills, beautiful but treacherous. She didn't notice how quiet the birds had become, nor how the air carried a faint hum, like the breath of something waiting. Then it happened. A sharp whistle, and the first arrow struck the wagon's side with a heavy thunk. The horses screamed, rearing against their harnesses. Eleanor clutched the reins, heart hammering, as another arrow split through the air and grazed her shoulder. Before she could think, they were all around her. Shadows rising from the rocks, fierce men on painted horses, their faces streaked with ochre and ash. Apache. She froze, gripping the seat as the horses bolted. The wagon careened down the slope, wheels bouncing over stone. She screamed, yanking the reins, but it was too late. The wagon hit a ditch and tipped violently. Wood splintered. The sky spun, then silence. When she came to, the world was spinning. The sun burned overhead, dust in her throat, her head pounding. Her bonnet was gone. Her dress was torn and her arm throbbed with pain, and standing over her was a man. He was tall, broader than any she'd ever seen. His skin bronzed, his black hair tied with strips of leather. A necklace of bone rested against his chest and his eyes. They were like polished obsidian, deep and cold yet alive with a strange light. He said something in a language she didn't understand. When she didn't move, he crouched down and repeated it slower, his tone not cruel but commanding. Behind him, other warriors gathered, their bows drawn, waiting. Eleanor swallowed hard, her breath shaking. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked. "Please, I mean no harm." The warrior's gaze flickered over her, not with lust, not with pity, but with the calm intensity of a man judging whether something should live or die. Then slowly he raised a hand and motioned for his men to lower their weapons. One of them spoke angrily in Apache, gesturing toward her, toward the wagon. But the tall one shook his head. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her face, and spoke again softly this time. His voice was low, smooth as the wind between canyons. She didn't know the words, but something in his tone stilled her trembling. When she met his eyes again, he said in halting English, "You are hurt." Eleanor blinked, startled by the unexpected gentleness. It's nothing," she lied, trying to rise. Pain shot through her shoulder and she gasped. He caught her before she fell. His hands were strong, steady, his touch warm even through her trembling. "You fall. You rest," he said firmly. The others murmured, uncertain. He barked a command that silenced them. Two men lifted her carefully and carried her toward the hills. As the sun dipped low, they led her into a hidden canyon, a place of stone walls and trickling streams, concealed from the world. Fires flickered. Women and children emerged from the shadows, their faces wary but curious. The tall warrior stood beside her as she swayed from exhaustion. Then he spoke his name, the sound like a drumbeat. "Taza." Eleanor barely managed to nod before her knees gave way. He caught her again, holding her close as the firelight danced over them. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was his face. Unreadable, fierce and strangely beautiful, and the thought that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her as if she mattered. She didn't know it yet, but this night, this moment between life and death, would mark the beginning of everything she had ever longed for. When Eleanor awoke, the air was cool and smelled of smoke and sage. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the memory returned, the crash, the warriors, the man called Taza. She sat up slowly, her arm aching from where the arrow had grazed her. A soft blanket of woven wool covered her. She was inside a small brush shelter, its roof made of willow branches and hides. Through the narrow opening she saw sunlight streaming over a canyon rim high above. Outside, the camp stirred to life. Children laughed somewhere near the river, and the sound of horses drifted on the wind. Women moved gracefully between fires, grinding corn, tending pots, weaving. The men, tall, stoic, watchful, lingered near the outer edges, their presence both protective and intimidating. Eleanor's heart thudded. She was a prisoner, yet she did not feel like one. No one had bound her. No one had struck her. Still, the weight of fear pressed against her ribs. When the flap lifted, she flinched. But it was a woman, older, her hair streaked with silver, her face calm and kind. She carried a wooden bowl filled with stew. Without speaking, she gestured for Eleanor to eat. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded gratefully and took the bowl. The broth was smoky, rich with herbs. Hunger overcame caution, and she finished every drop. When she looked up, the woman smiled faintly, then turned and left, leaving Eleanor with a single word softly spoken. "Shani." friend. Later that day, Taza came. He ducked under the low shelter, his shadow filling the space. Dressed in leather and bone ornaments, he carried himself like a man who owned not land but the wind itself. His eyes found hers instantly, dark, unreadable yet never cruel. "You wake," he said in slow, careful English. "No pain?" Eleanor swallowed. "It hurts a little," she said, touching her arm. "But I'm alive. Thanks to you." Taza inclined his head. "You fell. Could have died. My men wanted to leave you." I said no. "Why?" she asked softly. He looked at her a long moment before answering. "You looked already dead inside, but breathing. That is not right." The words struck deep, almost painfully so. She blinked away sudden tears. He crouched near the fire, adding a small piece of wood. "You stay until safe. Then go." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Go where?" "My wagon is gone. My husband—" She stopped. Even saying the word felt hollow. Taza studied her. "Your man? He hurt you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked away, ashamed of her silence. He rose slowly. "In my land, woman is life. Man who breaks her and breaks himself." He left then, without waiting for an answer. Over the following days, Eleanor wandered the canyon, watched by curious eyes but left unharmed. She helped the women fetch water, tended to a small boy's scraped knee, and offered her sewing needle to repair torn moccasins. The Apache women began to soften toward her, especially Shawnee, who taught her simple words in their language. At night, fires dotted the canyon floor like stars fallen to earth. The people sang, low haunting melodies that carried on the wind. Eleanor sat apart at first, listening. Then slowly she began to hum along, and always, somewhere near the edge of the firelight, she would see Taza, watching her quietly, as if waiting for something unseen to bloom. One night she gathered her courage and approached him. "You said I looked dead inside," she murmured. "You were right. My husband, he sees me as a duty, not a soul." Taza's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. "You are not dead. You are lost. Lost things can be found." Their eyes met across the glow of the fire, hers filled with unshed tears, his reflecting the ancient calm of the desert. Something unspoken passed between them, a current that neither could name. That night, Eleanor lay awake long after the singing ceased, staring at the moon framed by the mouth of the shelter. The canyon had become her prison, and yet in some strange, inexplicable way, it was beginning to feel like freedom. And though she did not yet know it, her heart had already begun to belong to the man who had once been her captor. Morning in the canyon broke differently than on the ranch. There were no bells, no voices of hired men, no bitter silence between husband and wife. Here, the light crept gently over the stone walls, filling the air with warmth before the day's heat began. Eleanor woke to birdsong and the smell of smoke from the cooking fires. It had been over a week since she was brought into the Apache camp. At first she had counted the days, whispering them under her breath like prayer beads. Now she had stopped. Time felt slower here, stretched wide and golden like the sky above. The people had grown used to her presence. Children no longer stared but ran past her with laughter. Women nodded when she helped grind maize or fetch water from the river. She learned their rhythm, their patience, their quiet dignity. And she learned from Taza most of all. He came often, though never intrusively. He would sit near her by the evening fire, carving something from wood or braiding leather. Sometimes he spoke in English. Sometimes he didn't speak at all. Yet in the silence she felt more seen than she ever had in all her years of marriage. One afternoon, while the men were away hunting, she followed Taza along a narrow trail that wound up the canyon. The climb was steep, but he moved with effortless grace. "Why bring me here?" she asked, breathless, clutching her skirts. "You ask too many whys," he said, smiling faintly for the first time. "You will see." At the top, the canyon opened into a plateau of red stone and wind. From that height, the world spread wide and endless, desert stretching to the horizon, dotted with mesas and distant mountains painted blue with haze. Eleanor gasped softly. "It's beautiful," Taza nodded. "This is our heart. My people call it Nadani, the place of beginnings." He knelt, touching the earth reverently. "Hear the spirits listen." "The spirits?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He looked at her then. Not as a captive, not as an outsider, but as a woman who had lived with loss. The land remembers everything, he said. It knows sorrow. It knows love. It takes and gives back. He pressed his hand flat against the earth. When we lose something, we speak to the ground. We ask it to help us heal. Eleanor followed his gesture, her palm trembling as she laid it against the warm rock. What would it give me, I wonder? She whispered. Maybe what your heart asks for, he said quietly, if your heart still knows what that is. She stared out over the desert, wind catching her hair. The ache she'd buried for so long, what for love, for a child, for belonging, rose within her like a tide. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel it fully, without shame. I used to think God had forgotten me, she said. Now I wonder if I just stopped listening. Taza's eyes met hers. The Great Spirit does not forget. Only people do. The words lingered between them, soft as prayer. They walked back as the sun began to fall, their shadows long against the canyon walls. That evening, as the tribe sang by the fire, Eleanor found herself humming along, her voice weaving into the melody like it had always belonged there. Later, she saw Taza across the flames, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable, yet something passed between them, something both fierce and gentle, older than language itself. When the song ended, she rose and walked toward him. Taza, she said softly, do you believe the land really listens? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Yes, but the land cannot speak for us. We must tell it what we need. She hesitated, then whispered, and what if what I need is not allowed? Taza's voice lowered, a quiet echo beneath the stars. Then it is what your soul has chosen. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. The wind outside her shelter seemed to carry his words again and again. She pressed a hand to her chest and realized, for the first time since her girlhood, that her heart was beating not with fear but with life. And somewhere deep within, a question began to bloom, one she could no longer ignore. Was it possible that what she had lost all those years might yet be found? Here among these people, in the eyes of the man who had saved her? The desert night was a living thing, full of whispers, sighs, and the rustle of unseen wings. The fires in the Apache camp had burned low, throwing soft golden halos against the canyon walls. Most of the tribe slept, the children curled beside their mothers, the warriors keeping silent watch under the silver moon. But Eleanor Hayes could not sleep. She sat by the dying embers of her own small fire, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The stars stretched overhead in a glittering sea, so many they made her dizzy to look at. It was in that vastness that she began to cry. Quietly at first, then harder until her hands trembled. No one had ever seen her like this, not Thomas, not even herself. She had held her grief like armor for so long that she'd forgotten what it was to let it spill free. Out here, far from her house of stone and silence, she could finally break. She didn't hear Taza approach. He moved without sound, the same way the wind moved over sand. Only when his shadow fell across her did she lift her tear-streaked face. His eyes caught the firelight, dark and steady. You weep for your home? He asked softly. Eleanor shook her head, her voice trembling. I weep because I don't know what home is anymore. He studied her for a long time before kneeling beside her. You are not like most white women, he said quietly. You do not fight what you feel. She gave a short, bitter laugh. If you only knew how long I've been fighting, Taza, against God, against my husband, against myself. He tilted his head slightly. And who has won? Her breath hitched. No one. For a moment there was only the crackle of the fire between them. Then he spoke again, voice low and certain. When my people hurt, we give it to the earth. The ground knows pain. It will take yours, she met his eyes. And what if the pain is that I was never able to give life? Taza looked into her, through her. Then you ask for it. The earth listens to those who ask with truth. She hesitated. And if I am not Apache? A faint smile touched his lips. The earth does not care for names. The silence that followed was deep, not empty, but full of something living, sacred. The wind moved gently through the canyon, stirring the coals. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice so quiet it barely rose above the whispering flames. I want one child, Taza, just one. Before I die. Her words trembled, but her gaze held steady. Taza's face did not change, but something in his eyes deepened, an understanding beyond words. He rose slowly, then extended his hand. Come, he said. She hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. He led her beyond the fires, up a slope where the canyon opened into a pool of moonlight. The air was cool, silver, and still. The stars seemed closer here, as if they too were listening. He stopped, turning to face her. If you give your body to me, he said solemnly, you give your spirit too. Among my people they are one. Are you ready for both? Her breath caught. I have nothing left to give, she whispered. Only this wish. He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Then let the earth take your sorrow and give you life in return. Eleanor closed her eyes, the moonlight bathing her face. For a long moment neither moved. The desert around them was utterly silent, as if holding its breath. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself looking into his eye, dark, certain, endless as the night sky. Just one child, she whispered. Taza nodded once, his hand finding hers, and beneath the vast, eternal stars the vow was made, not in words, but in the quiet surrender of two broken souls finding the courage to hope again. That night, the wind carried their breath through the canyon, and the earth itself seemed to sigh, as though it had heard her promise and chosen to remember it forever. The first weeks after her vow passed in a blur of heat, dust, and cautious intimacy. Eleanor felt the weight of the decision she had made beneath the stars every time she caught Taza's gaze across the fire. He did not push her, nor did he speak of what had been promised. Instead, he moved with the quiet certainty of a man who understood time and patience. Life in the canyon became a rhythm she had never known. She rose before dawn to help fetch water from the river. The cold current shocking against her skin, she learned to carry firewood and grind corn, her hands roughened but steady. The Apache women taught her songs that spoke of courage and sorrow, of love and loss. At first she felt like a visitor, her pale skin and foreign dress marking her apart. But gradually, through shared labor and quiet words, she began to belong. Taza remained a constant presence. Sometimes he worked alongside her, repairing leather harnesses or carving small wooden charms. Other times he would simply watch from a distance, his eyes never leaving her, his silence filled with a strange intimacy. Eleanor found herself longing for these moments, the quiet comfort of being seen without judgment. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the canyon rim, Eleanor wandered near the riverbank. The water reflected the sky in liquid gold, and the distant mountains shimmered in heat haze. She dipped her hands into the cool current, letting it run over her fingers, and for a moment she felt an unfamiliar peace. Taza approached silently, stepping over the rocks to stand beside her. The river teaches patience, he said softly. Water does not rush, yet it shapes the land. She glanced at him, her reflection shimmering alongside his. I feel like I'm being shaped, she whispered. By this place, by you. He said nothing, only watched her. Then in a quiet voice he asked, do you regret your choice? Eleanor shook her head, her hair falling across her face in the wind. No, I only fear what I cannot control. My husband, the world outside. Taza's hand brushed hers, light but deliberate. That world does not know what you have found here. The canyon, the people, they protect you, and I will protect you. Her heart thudded at his words. For the first time she felt that protection was not possession, but respect, a promise woven in silence and trust. But the outside world could not be kept at bay forever. Weeks later, a patrol of soldiers rode near the canyon rim, forcing Eleanor to confront the reality she had tried to leave behind. She watched from a hidden ledge as the men questioned Taza and his warriors. Their words were sharp, demanding. The air was tense, electric with the threat of violence. Taza returned to her later that night, weary but calm. They will not understand, he said, his dark eyes shadowed with anger he did not show. Your husband, too. You are no longer the woman they knew. Eleanor's hands trembled. Then where do I belong? He touched her face, thumb brushing away a strand of hair. Here, he said simply. With your child, with this land, with me. You live between two worlds now, Eleanor. One outside the canyon and one inside. The choice is yours. That night she lay awake, the moonlight spilling across the shelter floor. Her thoughts were a tangled thread, fear, longing, and the echo of her vow beneath the stars. She realized that to survive, to embrace what she truly wanted, she would have to let go of the world she had always known. Her heart, once hollow, now throbbed with the pulse of life she had almost given up on. In Taza's eyes, she saw a reflection of the woman she was becoming, strong, unafraid, and ready to trust. And though the canyon was still a world apart, Eleanor knew she had already crossed the invisible line. She was no longer merely a guest. She was part of something ancient, wild, and eternal. Somewhere deep inside, a new rhythm had begun. The rhythm of a life lived in courage, hope, and the promise of the child she would one day carry. The first time Eleanor returned to the Hayes Ranch, the house smelled the same: polished wood, stale tobacco, and lingering bitterness. She had been gone only a fortnight, yet it felt like a lifetime. Her husband, Thomas Hayes, sat behind his massive oak desk, eyes cold and calculating. "You're back," he said, voice clipped. "I had begun to think the Apaches had taken more than your dignity." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she held her chin high. "I'm here to collect what we need from the neighboring ranches," she said carefully. "The medicine, the supplies. I will leave again soon." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Supplies are the least of my concern. Your absence and your condition, Mrs. Hayes, are what trouble me." Eleanor froze. Condition? The word hung in the air like a blade. She had not told anyone of the child growing inside her. Not Thomas, not a soul. Her secret, the fruit of the canyon and of Taza's care, was sacred. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady though her stomach twisted. Thomas slammed his hand on the desk. "You are with child. And I know it's not mine. That Apache's mark is on you, I see it in your eyes." Eleanor's pulse quickened, and for the first time fear surged through her chest. "It's not true," she whispered, but she knew there was no convincing him otherwise. "You dare lie to me?" Thomas bellowed. He stood looming over her like a storm cloud. "You will bear the consequences of your betrayal." The words cut deeper than any arrow. Eleanor felt trapped, as if the walls themselves were closing in. She realized that the world she had left behind, the world that had been empty and cold, now threatened to consume her entirely. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice gaining strength, "I will not be treated as your possession. I will protect my child." His face twisted in fury. "You speak of a child born of treachery, and you think yourself free?" Before she could respond, he grabbed her arm, shaking her violently. Pain shot through her shoulder, and she gasped, stumbling back. "You will obey me," he roared, "or you will regret the day you walked into this house." Eleanor's eyes darted toward the window. Beyond the fences lay the desert, the place where she had known life, safety, and a love Thomas could never comprehend. She realized then that she could not remain in this house, not with him, not with the threat he represented. That night she packed a small bundle of clothes and supplies. Her hands shook, but her heart was resolute. She would flee into the desert, back to the canyon, to the man who had shown her care and respect. She would find Taza again, and her child would grow where it was loved and protected. As she stepped into the night, the moonlight painting the land in silver, she heard Thomas shout from the porch, his voice thick with rage, "You will return to me." But Eleanor did not look back. She ran, her bare feet pressing into the cool sand, her shawl trailing behind her like a banner of defiance. The wind carried her forward, whispering through the canyons, guiding her back to the place where life, not tyranny, awaited. Hours later, exhausted and trembling, she collapsed near the river where she had first met Taza. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but the sight of the flowing water steadied her. Somewhere in the shadows she sensed him, silent, watchful, waiting. When he stepped forward, his presence filled the night like a shield. "You ran well," he said quietly. "The desert welcomed you back. I will see that no harm comes to you or the child." Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks, a mixture of fear, relief, and the first true hope she had felt in years. She realized then that the life she had longed for, one child, love, and safety, was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach, in the arms of the man who had saved her, and in the sanctuary of the canyon. For the first time, she felt that she had escaped not just her husband's wrath, but the empty life she had been living, and was stepping into a future where she could truly belong. Eleanor awoke to the soft hum of the canyon morning. The wind whispered through the crevices, carrying with it the scent of sage and warm earth. Her body ached from the journey. Every step through the night's desert sands had tested her strength. But the fear that had gripped her in Thomas's house was gone. Somewhere ahead, near the river bend where the sun first kissed the canyon walls, she saw him. Taza. He stood motionless, his silhouette outlined against the rising sun, like a guardian spirit woven into the rocks. Relief flooded her chest. She had made it back. Back to the man who had treated her with respect, who had saved her from a life of fear and emptiness. Taza, she called softly, her voice trembling with exhaustion and hope. He turned, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. His dark eyes, fierce yet tender, met hers. He crossed the last few paces to her without urgency, his presence steadying her like the canyon itself. "You returned," he said quietly, almost as if stating a simple fact. Yet the weight of his words carried the depth of a promise. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Tears pricked her eyes as she stumbled forward. He caught her effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around her. She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength that had held her when she was broken, the warmth that promised safety. "You are safe now," he murmured. His voice was both a balm and a vow. "No one will harm you here." She pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "Taza, I'm carrying our child." A flicker of emotion crossed his face, pride, tenderness, and an almost fierce protectiveness. "Then you have brought life into this land," he said, his voice steady but reverent. "The child is ours, and I will guard it with my life." For the first time in years, Eleanor smiled freely. The weight she had carried, fear of judgment, of betrayal, of Thomas's wrath, lifted like morning mist. She had returned to where she belonged, to a man who saw her as more than a vessel, more than a wife in name only. The women of the tribe approached quietly, their expressions curious and warm. Shani stepped forward, offering a blanket and a small gift, a charm woven from red thread and feathers. "For the child," she said simply. Her voice held acceptance, respect, and the quiet joy of a woman welcoming another into the fold. Eleanor accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. The children nearby peeked from behind the bushes, their laughter breaking the tension. One little boy ran forward and tugged at Eleanor's skirts. She knelt, letting him reach up and place a small bundle of wildflowers in her hands. Taza watched, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "They will teach the child to know the land," he said, "to understand its songs, its stories, its strength." Evening descended slowly, painting the canyon in amber and gold. Eleanor sat beside the fire, her hand resting on her belly. Taza settled next to her, his presence a shield against the outside world, a silent promise that they were together. "The canyon has given you back to me," he said softly, "and you have given me life again." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was lost," she whispered, "but here, I am found." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night air. The stars above the canyon shone brighter than anywhere Eleanor had ever been, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to her return. In that moment, the past, the house, her husband's anger, the loneliness that had gnawed at her for years, seemed a distant memory. Here in the canyon, surrounded by people who welcomed her and in the arms of a man who truly loved her, she understood what freedom meant. She was home, she was safe, and soon she would give life, a child born not of fear or duty but of love and courage. The night fell fully, and Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the canyon lull her into peace. The journey had been long and treacherous, but she had returned to where she truly belonged, at the heart of the desert, with the man who had claimed not her body, but her trust, her heart, and the promise of their child. The dawn arrived soft and golden, spilling across the canyon walls like molten honey. Eleanor awoke with a fluttering in her chest, the life within her reminding her of the vow she had whispered beneath the stars months ago. The time had come. She knew it instinctively, as though the desert itself was guiding her. Taza was already awake, sitting quietly near the fire, sharpening a wooden tool with methodical care. His eyes lifted when he sensed her movement. "It is time," he said softly, his voice steady and calm, a pillar against her rising panic. Eleanor nodded, though fear gripped her. Despite all the lessons she had learned in the canyon, how to trust, how to endure, how to let go, nothing could have fully prepared her for this moment. Taza rose and offered his arm. "Come," he said. "The earth will help you as it has helped us." The women of the tribe moved quickly and silently, gathering herbs and blankets, setting the small shelter with care and precision. Shani approached Eleanor, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are strong," she whispered. "The child will know the courage of both parents." Eleanor sank onto the soft blankets, her breaths coming in shallow waves. Taza knelt beside her, holding her hands. "Do not fear," he murmured. "You are not alone." Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Eleanor felt the rise and fall of life in her body, a power she had never known she possessed. Taza never left her side, whispering words of encouragement, brushing damp hair from her face and guiding her through each surge of agony with a patience born of deep understanding. Through the long morning, Eleanor felt something she had never experienced in all her lonely years, a fierce, undeniable connection, not just to Taza, but to the life that was about to enter the world. She whispered her vow again under her breath, her fingers clinging to his. Just one child. Just one child. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, a cry pierced the canyon, small, fragile, yet impossibly strong. Eleanor's tears fell freely as the midwife placed the baby in her arms. A boy, pale-skinned like her, yet with the deep, dark eyes of Taza. "He is beautiful," Eleanor whispered, awe and wonder trembling in her voice. She pressed her cheek to his, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat, the warmth of new life flowing through her arms. Taza rose and lifted the child toward the sky, the sunlight catching in his hair. "Kiona," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Gift from the sky. You are the promise of our people, the bridge between worlds." Eleanor watched, tears streaming, her heart full beyond measure. She had given all in her fear, her trust, her body, and received a miracle in return. Kiona's tiny fingers clutched hers, and in that instant she knew the vow beneath the stars had been fulfilled. The tribe gathered around, their faces a mixture of reverence and joy. The women laid hands upon Eleanor and the child, murmuring blessings that carried the weight of generations. The children laughed and played nearby, drawn to the new life among them. Taza knelt beside Eleanor again, his hand on her shoulder. "The desert has heard your wish," he said softly, "and it has answered. This child is ours, and you have given him life." Eleanor pressed her forehead to his, letting herself rest in the strength and love of the man who had become her protector, her guide, and her heart. The canyon itself seemed to sigh with relief, the wind carrying the promise of life across the mesas and hills. That night, Eleanor held Kiona close, listening to the gentle murmur of the canyon and the quiet footsteps of Taza as he moved among the sleeping tribe. She felt whole for the first time in her life, healed, loved, and part of a world that had once seemed impossible to reach. Her vow had not only been fulfilled, it had transformed her life, binding her to a man, a child, and a people who had shown her that love, courage, and hope could exist even in the most unexpected places. And in the quiet, Eleanor whispered once more, her heart full and overflowing, "Thank you for this gift, for everything." The desert answered with a gentle breeze, carrying her words into eternity. The first light of morning spilled over the canyon, painting the rock walls with streaks of gold and crimson. The fires had long died down, leaving only embers in the soft, steady warmth of the earth. Eleanor lay awake, cradling Kiona against her chest. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and she marveled at the miracle of his life, the embodiment of the vow she had whispered beneath the stars so many moons ago. Taza stirred beside her, rising quietly and stretching against the dawn. His gaze fell on Eleanor and the child, and for a moment his fierce warrior's exterior softened into something tender and unguarded. He knelt, brushing a stray lock of hair from Eleanor's face, and whispered, "We are all here now, together." Eleanor's lips curved into a small, contented smile. "Yes," she murmured. Together, the canyon was alive with quiet movement. The women gathered near the river, preparing breakfast, while the children laughed and ran along the sand. Even the warriors carried a sense of calm, their alertness softened by the promise of peace and new life. The tribe, once wary of her, now embraced her as one of their own. Eleanor rose carefully, her body still weary but her spirit unburdened. She walked to the river, holding Kiona close, letting the cool water run over her hands and the child's tiny feet. The reflection of the sky and canyon in the water seemed to promise a future as vast and limitless as the land itself. Taza appeared beside her, placing his hand over hers on the water. "You have given life," he said softly, "and in giving you have changed everything." She looked up at him, her heart full. "I never believed I could be happy," she admitted. "I never believed love could be gentle, patient, and real." Taza's eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. "Then you did not know where to look. The canyon does not judge. The earth does not lie, and I will never let you fall again." Eleanor felt a shiver of emotion pass through her. She had left the world of her husband's control, the cold halls of wealth and the emptiness of unfulfilled desire. Here in the wild embrace of the desert and among people who had claimed her not by law but by love, she was truly alive. The child in her arms stirred, letting out a soft cry. Eleanor held him to her chest, rocking him gently, feeling the warmth of life pulse through her. Taza knelt beside them, his hands steady and strong, a protective presence around both mother and child. "The world outside this canyon will always exist," he said, his voice quiet, but firm. "But here we have our own world, one built on trust, courage, and love. Nothing can take that from us." Eleanor nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I have everything I ever wanted," she said, "and I will give everything I am to keep it." Taza's hand brushed hers once more, and together they watched the sun rise fully over the canyon, its light spilling across the land like a blessing. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and warm earth, and Eleanor felt the promise of all that lay ahead. A life of love, a child to nurture, and a man who had become her protector, her partner, and her heart. As Kiona's soft breathing mingled with the gentle wind, Eleanor whispered a vow once more, not to the stars this time, but to the life she now held in her arms. "I will love you. I will protect you. I will give you everything." Taza wrapped an arm around her, holding them close. "And together," he said, "we will face everything, as one family, as one people, as one heart." The canyon seemed to hum with approval, the stones, the river, the wind, all bearing witness to a new dawn. Eleanor looked out over the endless desert and knew with the deepest certainty that this was the beginning of forever, a future born from courage, love, and the fulfillment of a vow whispered beneath the stars. And with that promise, the canyon, the desert, and the hearts of those who lived there welcomed her fully home.